Now, one of the big things is that we want students to observe, and we observe with all of our senses. Now, one thing we don't want to do is have the kids taste anything necessarily, but we really want them to listen. You know, with our sense of listening, if you take a second, what do you hear? Could you identify the 5 or 6, possibly more different sounds that you hear with your ears? We want them to kind of dig through and see things. Be careful about ants and scorpions and those kinds of things. Sometimes you have to dig a little bit and you can find some of these little guys. You have termites all over, and we think of them as pesky insects in our house. However, without the termites here, what would happen to all of our forests? It would be full. I mean, the forest floor would be full of just dead tree debris. And what would happen to the other organisms that they need to survive? They wouldn't have any room. But then what do they smell as they go up to a tree, or they put a leaf to their nose? What do they smell? What does the dirt smell like? And we want them to describe and do those kinds of observations and be very descriptive in this type of investigation. So a few key factors you want to observe is when you're looking at the different kinds of trees, you're not trying to count every single tree. You want to kind of focus on the different species of trees. So you might come across, you know, a nice big pine or an oak, and you want to list what kind it is. And how do we distinguish between the pine and the oak, or the sweet gum, or those kinds of trees? It's usually by its bark and its leaf. And so those are the kind of things we want to notice, we want to take pictures of, or we want to sketch in our notes. With the organisms, you know, if you come across ants, we don't want to count every single ant, but we do want to count maybe how many ant piles that we have. Some other things we look at is maybe the bigger organisms like squirrels and ducks. Here we've got a few ducks kind of walking around here. Those we definitely can count and quantify. And I just do like a little tally mark for each thing I find, and we can add it up later at the end. But just as we look at organisms, understanding plants, animals, insects, you know, we're looking at the variety, and that's what we're trying to quantify in the fullest sense. Also, sometimes we want them to draw inferential evidence. So what do they infer? I don't see really what's happening in the water, but I can infer that these fish are probably eating microorganisms, macroinvertebrates, all kinds of different things. I want to show you a great example of how students can infer something. Behind me you see this tree, and that's kind of weird. Why did that do that? You know, one big thing we want the students to understand is interdependence. And for example, on this right here, you see so many different organisms. You have this vine running up the tree, and it's necessary for it to have that structure to try and get to a higher area where it can get its light source. Here you see another great example of interdependence with this vine making its way up the tree and really clinging to the tree as best it can in order for it to get high to where it has a great source of light. You notice there's not as much down here at the bottom as it will get further up higher it goes to reach for that light. Another interesting thing is this lichen. It's actually two organisms put together. It's a symbiotic relationship. So here you have the moss And the lichen is kind of a composite of algae and fungus. But again, you'll notice that a lot of times, not all the time, but these do not prefer direct sunlight, the moss and the lichen. So here I am on this side of the tree. You don't see as much, just a little bit here and there. But on the other side of the tree, you find quite a bit. It's very thick in its collection of it. And a lot of times it's because the direct sunlight. So here in North America, we have our sun obviously rise in the east and set in the west, but it stays pretty much in the southern part of the sky. And so I know that the northern side of the tree is a little bit more shaded most of the time, and therefore it might actually have that on the north side. It's not the case all the time, because in a thickly dense forest, it's going to be shaded all around, and you might have moss and lichen covering the entire tree. You find them on rocks, you find them all over the place. And so those are the kind of things we want to observe and we want to collect data on. And here you think about landforms, and a lot of them are results of what? Moving water. So as you go down here, you'll see how it causes erosion. We have ravines, leads into tributaries and creeks and all kinds of interesting things, all because of the movement of water.